The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings. How's everybody doing? The new year, 2023. I want to greet the early risers, M. Jewel. That seems to be, is that Jewel? Or, well, no, M. Jewel. Wolf, Manlu, who's made some real interesting comments in the course of the show. Sister Robin, one of our most dedicated viewers, consciously and otherwise. M. Jewel. Let's see, who else do we have here? Those are the opening viewers. So that's pretty good at this time, you know. So I've got a nice menu for your appetite today. If you haven't had any breakfast, this can be breakfast, lunch, and dinner. In fact, if you're going to talk about a historical menu, now this is some real source stuff, going back to the source. So I've really enjoyed you on these last 2 years and 2 months, the time that I've been doing this show, and be enjoying it going forward. So how you all doing? You cool? You all right? The last 2 weeks, the show went on automatic pilot, and we showed 2 previous shows on the TWA, and those shows are really fitting as preparation for today's show. Of course, people have been watching my show. You've got a lot more foundation. So I've been taking time to build up to this. And I'm going to say again, this is an introduction, but it's new stuff. You're not going to hear historians covering this. This is part of the historical menu that is generally left out. So I've got something in store for you here. The first thing I wanted to do was thank all the viewers who have made financial contributions to the show. This show has cost me money because they put me on a low algorithm because they don't particularly like the message. It's been slower to build up a subscribership. And with the help of Brother Ugawa, help of Sister Felicia Hardman, and Pan African DTV and others, especially Brother Ugawa, we've been able to up the ante, but it would be going a lot faster if I had a pleasing message for the owners of these sites. I'm not here to please nor tease, just to tell the truth. So this has been a slower rise in terms of getting viewers, but what we have is some very dedicated viewers, and you all are that. Brother Ugawa and I were commenting on the shows, and we both came to the same conclusion. Yeah, Brother Wolf Manlu said, hit the like button. Yeah, that's very important. We both came to the same conclusion. What's most special for me about this show, and he's noted the same thing, is the love that has been coming from you all. And that has been what I appreciate most, is that love. And coming from different folks, and it's real appreciation, and that's what really keeps you going. That's definitely my main reason for doing this, is with love, sharing some things that can be useful in your life for transforming and improving your own growth and development and the society in which we live in. I see Ty 313 is on, right on, and the art of ancient Egyptian metaphysics, and 5-star review. Okay, y'all are lining up here. And one thing I have to say about the viewers of the show is they have good taste. Some are, the Facebook people seem to be more interested in the ancient stuff. When I hit politics, they don't seem to be as interested. And you're really making a big mistake, because the whole point of the past is to apply it to change the present. What's the point? You know what I mean? This isn't just some escape into yesterday, though it's important to draw on yesterday. And I know what it was like when I first started hitting the books and doing the study on my people. It was like a love affair. It blew my mind. You know what I mean? So I understand that. That's good. But at the same time, you should be looking at this current reality and how you use the past to change the present and the future. So that's been part of what this show is about. And so I really want to say that I really appreciate the love that's coming from you. And I hope you realize there's a lot of hard work that goes into these shows. Because while I'm an innovator, I also do research to back my stuff up. I'm not just a fact person, because facts can be twisted any way you want. I'm into the truth, and God's blessed me with some beautiful light. And then from my own experience, I've come up with others. And this is now 64 years of doing this, so my thing is to pass on a message and for others to use it. I want to thank the people who have been making donations, and in this particular case, recently have made donations. And because we're still mastering this Cash App method, if your donations have gone back to you, send it back and we'll get it. So I want to thank for recent donations, Sister LaShonda Henderson, who's consistent, Angela Houston, Sandra Heron, Paul Thompson, William Robinson, and Ronnie Garrido. Those are recent. There's others who have been making contributions in the past. A consistent donation will help, because I do have to pay for some help to do this show. And it's hit me a lot of money over 2.5 years. I can't keep doing that if the show's going to stay on. So I want to thank you and all the others who have made donations before. And I want to again thank Brother Ugawa. He's really worked his behind off on this show, used a lot of skill, and has helped draw people to the show, including Hoppy, Sister Felicia Hardin. I see Sister Coco there, right on, with her Rev greetings, revolutionary greetings. I like all these cool people here. You know what I mean? Yeah, revolutionary greetings back to you and everybody else. So it's through Brother Ugawa that Sister Felicia Hardin and her partner, they've got a nice team there, has hooked up with us and has given us a lot of support, and we're giving them support and love. And we've got a nice relationship going on there because they're genuine and real. And that to me is what's the most important thing with anybody is their realness, and that is what they are. So you should be supporting Hoppy's Black Excellence Conference is coming up this February. Give them support. And these are young people who are conscious and who are doing the work and also understand the interests of their generation. So they're particularly dealing with things that tap in to their interests. And I'll be on their show regularly, and we'll be having them on ours. We did a joint show a short time ago with Felicia. So today's show is the 114th show we've done in 2 years and 2 months, once a week. And each one of these take a lot of work. They're chapters in a book. And for those of you that are new to the show, you should go back and look at them. Some of them we've had our filmmaker, Lo Rajan, do work on. 2 of the 3 discussions with Julius Garvey had film work on them, and a number of others. And that cost me money too. But I do it because it's particularly special, a particular topic, and so I want to provide some film background and illustration. So if you look at the show has been covering a range of things: politics, freeing the mind, just family models, ancient African history, African and African American culture, and much more. So this show, in the beginning, it started off with the only successful Black Power, Black Freedom movement in the 60s to today, the San Francisco Freedom Movement, that is generally ignored. Successes are generally ignored. People are all up on the failures, and a lot of them identify with them because sometimes they've been heroic failures. But for me, there's 3 rules in war. 3 W's: win, win, and win. And I've lost no battles. That to me is a great offense to lose. Now, I know every battle I've been in a lot of them. The next one is the one I can lose. I get real humble before I get into a fight. And I'm talking about corporate fights, CIA, FBI fights, institutional fights within educational systems, fighting institutions like the Hoover Institute that laid out 80% of Ronald Reagan's agenda and beating them. You know what I mean? I only enter a fight when the cause is just and I know how to win. I'm not getting into anything that I'm going to lose. I'm a martial artist. And martial artists are generally taught to avoid a fight. And if you see you can't win, get the hell out of there. But you shouldn't get into one that you can't win, but you don't always know. You know what I mean? So winning, winning, and winning is my philosophy on life. Losing ain't no good thing. So I'm not into tragedy, because ain't no tragic things been happening to any movements I've been a part of or in my life. I've been fortunate in that respect because we're all under oppression. So These shows come from experience, but it's also encouraging you to pick up whatever you pick up to help free your mind and free your communities, to be involved in movements to do that. So this show has focused on some of these things. I think the second kickoff on this show dealt with Trump, and it was just before the election that threw him out of office. And what I did was do a historical projection on what I saw as the ways to whip him, which is what we did. And Black Lives Matter deserves the greatest amount of credit for that. And Trump's bungling deserves the rest. Because as Amilcar Cabral said, our greatest enemy is our own weaknesses. And Trump is a walking set of weaknesses. His mishandling of COVID really did his butt in, but it took help. But y'all don't give yourself credit for victories. You act like they didn't happen. And the authors of them, you put them to the side, you know? So that was one of the first shows talking about how to take Trump out of the White House and prepare him for the jailhouse. They've been awful slow on the jailhouse part. He's committed so many crimes. You could put 100 people in jail for what he's done. You know what I mean? Or 100 parts of him. So, and that film was taking post-Reconstruction 1876 and looking at post-Reconstruction 1968 and showing you how the Republicans in this case, whereas it was the Democrats in 1876, would pull out virtually the same playbook that was used in 1876 to try and cheat their way into the White House. Instead, they got overwhelmingly whipped, and it came from the grassroots level, especially. There were other factors in it, but the Black factor was the main factor. So a common feature of these shows has been a mixture of the African past with the African and African American present, as well as the African American past. And so the point is to make the past serve the present. That's the whole point. And some people have made the comment that, particularly a brother from South Africa, made the comment that they saw these shows as practical. And that's part of me. I'm fire and earth. Fire is creativity. This is astrological. Earth is practical. So generally, my stuff walks. It works. And so that's what the show tries to do, is provide you with stuff that you can use that will work, whether it's on a spiritual level, political level, a social level, your family level, community level, a national level, because I'm speaking to a global audience here. Africans at home and Africans abroad, to apply a term used by Marcus Garvey, my first master. So that's been part of the formula for this show, is to apply the past to the present and make it serve you, and then use it as a key for your future, which I know a lot of you are already doing. I'm a revolutionary and I'm an innovator. An innovator means I've created new schools of thought, two of which come directly from God. This turns some people off because they don't believe God's going to give you anything because they're coming from a book that says you can't see God, blah, blah. Well, real good innovation, which is creating new schools of thought in any area, the best ones come when you pipe into God's mind. All the great breakthroughs in science and art and mathematics and in all areas have come that way, because when you're able to think God's thoughts and God's privileged you enough for you to be able to do that, then you're able to see what's already there but hasn't been seen before. There's an old truth. There's nothing really creative under the sun. God's already created it all. But discovering it is the highest act of creativity a human being can experience. And I've had that experience a couple of times. And those things that come from that realm, and you're going to hear some of it in this show today, oh, baby, it works. It works. It's healing. And it's whole. And so you never get all of it. So this show is put forward. And this one has come from the beautiful light of God, twin lineal families. That's my term, but the formula came from God. This has been real key. And in this show, you're going to see today, there'll be some, again, talk about how this applies to the ancient history of ancient Kemet and the dynastic history. And of course, how it applies to us today. So twin lineal families, which is the key point of return to the African mother principle of male and female equality. The hardest thing I ever did, took 15 disciplines to write, and the most beautiful experience of my life. And writing Return to the African Mother Principle was like writing abstract art. And so this book here is a product of it. You know, took 5 years to write. And that's a beautiful artist that did this painting and other illustrations for the book. Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. The artist's name is Zodeng. He recently died by a freak automobile accident. Really unfortunate to lose him. So this show has especially drawn on that. And I'll simply say, twin lineal families and community, it's real key to revitalizing families today. It's real key for understanding the basis for just societies in the past. It's real key if you want to get your relationships together today. And it has carried us through more than many of us think. And this show is also focused on the sixfold stages to mental freedom. Again, an experience I went through. Malcolm, Amilcar Cabral, who's in the back there with the sunglasses on, and others, which is the real free the mind system. And more people are signing up for this. We had a Kwanzaa on the 30th. Brother Ustadi Kadiri, who's a leader in Pan-African People's Organization, one of my former students. He's in his late 70s. He's a master organizer, master printer, master mechanic, and a mathematician. And he organized this Kwanzaa. And attending it were a number of brothers and sisters who are part of the UNIA, Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, and they're in their 20s and 30s. And some of them are going to be signing up for the sixfold stages to mental freedom. So hopefully soon we'll have the 40 that we were looking forward to. This show has covered things like the Black Power movement, paradigms for African-centered education coming out of the San Francisco State strike, which I participated in, students led, and the Black Studies movement, which I was privileged to lead at San Francisco State, the Black Studies Department, for 12 years. And we innovated a radical discipline that the Hoover Institute and the CSU system, California State University system, tried to destroy. As I say, I don't lose battles, but it's always the next one you can lose. I don't think that I have any guarantee of victory. And that was a 2-year battle to keep Black studies alive, but more important, to put forward the African-centered model. And had they taken us out, you wouldn't see any African-centered Black studies departments in the country, because the Hoover Institute was behind the California State University system's move to wipe us out. And they targeted me and my class. I was tearing Black studies, Black politics, as a course they would duplicate. And if they could get away with duplicating one, they're going to duplicate the curriculum. But the president had been given the assignment to write us out. But he didn't do it, because when you engage in a battle, you should know your enemy. I knew what he wanted. I knew what he didn't want to do. And I knew how to deny him what he wanted. And so That was the key to winning there, but it was a rough, tough one. So this show has covered that. It's one of the few shows that's gone into the Aryan mind, covered Aryanism at all. One viewer noted that Wayne Chandler is the other one that has, and he's an outstanding historian. So all of these have been put forward as models you can use today. The key thing about my stuff is that it's not something, because I'm revolutionary, people think, oh, that's only when the revolution comes. Well, actually, we're engaged in change in our lives. That's a part of it. But real just models and real effective models, they can be used right now, personally, and then collectively in your own families and in your own communities. And then they're good for the future. But one of the problems with radical whites, like, say, Marxists, and I've always made the point I'm not anti-Marxist, but one of the problems is their ideas for changing society often has not been tested. And so they put forward theories and stuff, but untested theories, try it out on the ground, and it doesn't work. And oftentimes it doesn't work because their culture gets in the way, like the culture of Stalin and the Russian Revolution. To an extent, Mao's, to the extent that he distorted his Confucian culture and went emperor wholesale and contributed to the loss of over 30 million lives in the Great Leap Forward, where he wasn't trying to starve his people, but he made mistakes. And because he was not a good listener, people didn't want to tell the emperor that his clothes were raggedy. And as a result, a lot of people died. So a lot of people who call themselves revolutionaries, they got these long-term theories about how they're going to change society. They ain't been tested. And the key thing about anything that's useful is that it needs to be applied. And if it works, that's the best test. And so that's part of what this show is about. So many of these shows are also a series. And some of these will be published into books. I already have some of them laid out for that purpose. And then I'll add to it. Today's show especially grows out of the 5-part series on the Twa and the multiple series on the Anu, A-N-U. And so you'll see how those connect to what we're doing today, right now. And so the two best books for that are The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, caused by a choice between two cultures, which you can order on Gumroad, and the book Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. A lot of the things that I'll be addressing today, some of them are covered, but my stuff today is new, but it's an extension of what is in these two books. These are extremely important. And I would say for people that read the Mother Principle, it's abstract art. I wrote this to thank God for the beautiful truth that God shared with me, the most transforming experience of my life, the beautiful light. I've talked about it before. And so I'm linear, but I didn't write this book linear. I wrote it as abstract art because I was trying to return to God the beauty that God gave me, and I knew I couldn't come close to what God had shared with me, the secret basis for just societies. And when you hear this repeated in this show, don't say, oh, people run around, just pick this up. Note where it came from. It came through me, it came from God, but it came through me. And this is a big innovation. It is key to us transforming our families, our communities, and the larger society we're in, and the African world, and the world at large. And it comes out of this twin lineal family model. And the choice between two cultures basically describes the condition our communities are in right now. And by the way, those words come from God. Those are not my words. And if you think I'm going to be giving anybody credit for something that I've done, not even God. I mean, if I've done something, I did it. I've got people out of jail and they thank Jesus. I tell them, if you don't reverse who you're thanking, you go back to jail. Jesus did not get your black butt out of here. That was me. You can say Jesus was behind it. Bull. No, it wasn't. Because I could choose to do wrong. You're going to say Jesus was behind that? Huh? We're good at that. People save people's lives and thank God. You know what I mean? I have a friend who passed on. The Kwanzaa we had on the 30th, Imani, dedicated to Imani, was dedicated to a very beautiful sister who is the mother of Kwanzaa in the Bay Area, but across the United States, Sister McKenya, a very tall, regal sister who lived to 90 years of age. And she healed a lot of people. She literally, I sent her a person who had stage 4 cancer. And this was in the early 70s. Sisters, well, I won't say her name, but the sister, everyone in her group that had that cancer died. She's still alive. And it was Sister McKenya that healed her. But sometimes when our people get healed, they'll run around talking about thank Allah, thank God. Yeah, thank him. I'm sure that was a part of it. But thank the person that actually healed your butt. You hear me? Huh? Thank him. You know what I mean? Huh? So that's been the show. Now, the topic for today's show is a neglected subject in the study of Kemetic or Egyptian history and civilization. Most scholars start their discussion of Kemet with 32 to 3300 BCE. And I see we have a person here, Rasha Mela. Greetings to you. So most of the historians start there. That's black and white. And I have a friend who's writing a book just to prove that Kemet goes back to 3400 BC. You know, the problem with that one is, first of all, you are putting yourself in the position of accepting European historiography or dating systems, because they like that 3300 BC, and they all have agreed, the white ones have agreed it's 3200, because they have dated Mesopotamia or Samaria, which is today Iraq. David dated that back to 3300 BC without any evidence, because the Sumerians did not leave records that were solid. They had cuneiform scripts, you know, clay scripts. And so there's no real evidence to back that up. And while they're both river valley civilizations, Samaria can't compare to Kemet. And while some of us will like to say, well, they were black too, well, their worldview is a pessimistic worldview. And their people suffered a lot under their leaders from the very beginning. So I'm not interested in claiming any black credit for that civilization. But the key point is you're caught in a timeline trap when you start with 32 to 3300 BCE. That's a trap, okay? Because then you're left arguing whose civilization was the oldest. So that's one reason why that time period isn't good. Now, today's topic addresses this problem, and it's entitled in the beautiful leaflet that Brother Cinnabar, who does a work on this show for publicizing stuff and stuff like that, has put out. The topic is the little studied 10,000 year ancient pre-dynastic roots of dynastic Kemet, Egypt. Now, you're going to see later, I don't like the term pre-dynastic. I'm going to start off because I'm going to build a case and then show you why that isn't sufficient. So that's a topic, the little studied 10,000 year ancient pre-dynastic roots of dynastic Kemet. In other words, this show is going to go way beyond any 32 or 3300 BC. It's going back 10,000 BC. You hear me? 10,000. We're not dealing with the fruit, which is dynastic Kemet. We're dealing with the root. Can you dig that? Huh? See, I don't deal with what the historians have already dealt with, and I'm going to cover that. And I study it. Why? Because they've done a good job. I don't need to repeat the wheel. I'm not going to go back and do Diop's work or Theophil Obenga's work. They've done great work, and Obenga is the greatest scholar on ancient Kemet dynastic in the world today. And I look at his stuff. I hired him to teach in Black Studies and got him the biggest paycheck anybody got. He's about as political as my dead cat. But he told me, I need money. Obenga can spell politics. That's about it. He ain't political. You know what I mean? But he was political enough to know he needed to get him some money. And I got him some money because he deserved it. And when someone in ethnic studies commented about how they didn't like that, I blocked them from ever being able to rise above the level they were at because I was going to punish them. You cannot mistreat our great people or any of our people. We treat you with respect. You better treat us with respect. And to this day, they don't know how their little careers got stopped in the mud, which to me meant nothing. I wasn't going for no, other than being a full professor. I didn't want to be no dean or none of that. I wanted to teach and get in the community and organize, write, run around the country speaking and organize. That was it. And mainly organize. I taught and organized for 40 years. That was my agenda. You wanted office hours, call me on the phone because I'm in the community. At that time, we didn't have cell phones. You know what I mean? And that was good too. So you couldn't be calling me while I'm doing some organizing. So we're going to be going beyond this 3200, 3300 BCE. Now, this show is going to address the little studied 10,000 year ancient Kemetic roots of dynastic Kemet that's called pre-dynastic. You'll see later why I don't accept that term, but right now I'll use it and then I'll discard it. So in the promotional, you saw some questions, and that's basically what this show is going to address. The big question is this. Most historians will make this point and then just move on. And then they'll argue over which of the dynasties was the greatest, meaning post 3200 BC or 3300 BC. 18th dynasty, 20th dynasty, blah, blah. 3rd dynasty, 4th dynasty. So this show is going to address the historical question. How did the first dynasty of Kemet emerge with a full-blown culture ready-made, already in existence? How in the hell did that happen? And see, the people who study ancient Kemet don't seem to be interested because they'll just go on and deal with the dynasties and just go on and not address that question. Most other civilizations take a long time to develop. They're in the process of developing. If you look at this American one, which is with any European one, the notion of any of them being civilizations is an arguable point, because you'd have to prove that they're civilized. In a society like America that started off with genocide, slavery, stealing half of its neighboring land, Mexico, and trying to steal Canada. That's hardly civil. One definition of civilization, John Henry Clark's. And so what you see with America is a repetition of barbarism going on, but it is still in the process of becoming this so-called American experience. And you can see it playing out in the House of Representatives right now, you know, with the Republican leader of the House of Representatives having trouble getting his votes to be speaker. It looks like he's one vote short now. And by the time he gets it, he will have given up the speakership because he's given up all power, you know. But this country, to the extent that it has a civilization pre-existent, it was Britain. You know what I mean? And since then, it's been an exaggeration of Britain. And so we Africans, Native Americans, Latinos, other Asians, people of color, and those from Eastern Europe or anywhere else other than Western Europe has generally been out of the picture when it comes to the Euro-American project. Now, in the case of Eastern Europeans, they're Aryan, so they come out of a similar thing, and then under whiteness, they get to be white. So whatever America has, yeah, it owes it to Britain to a large extent, and it's put them in the mess they're in, and the way out is going to be the cultures of Africa and of color that are residing in this place. They're going to be providing and have been providing alternatives to this. But if you look at a place like China, China went through a period called the contending state period, where a number of states vied for power. And in 221 BC, they came up with a unified China and then slipped back and then would go forward. But the key point is, it was in the process of waging wars in the contending state period that China then developed its greatest philosophers, particularly Confucius and Lao Tzu, greatest military strategist Sun Tzu, and numerous other thinkers in a period of crisis. And so the period of crisis was the period in which they began to formulate the outlines of their civilization. But with Kemet, when they leap off, they have a fully formed one, not being formed in the process from 3200 or 3100 or 3300 BC on, already fully formed. In fact, most historians say after that, Kemet was in decline. And the main reason they say that is, with the exception of the pyramids, they didn't build anything new. They were drawing on the inheritance. So how is it that we deal with the dynastic periods and can chart them to the best of our ability, but ignore the pre-dynastic one? How is it that we do that? Or the ancient one? I'll discard the pre-dynastic one as a term pretty soon, but I don't want to start off that way. So how is it that Kemet's first dynasty that starts off with Menes, M-E-N-E-S, or Aha-Mena, A-H-A-M-E-N-A, the first pharaoh of Kemet, who you'll see bashing someone's head in unifying Kemet, how is it that when he comes into office, 3200 or 3300 BC, you have a complete writing system? It was already developed. You have not only a solar calendar, the most advanced calendar in the world that is used to this day. The calendar used throughout the world, most of the world, is the solar calendar coming out of Kemet, which meant a tremendous mastery of astronomy. And that would take a long time to come up with that. It can actually date the time in which this calendar was formulated, and it was before, well before the dynastic period. So you got a full-blown calendar, which is real key. Don't forget the Kemites innovated geometry, because as the floods of the Nile came in, a land would be wiped out, and so farmers had to have a reallocation of land. So they needed a mathematical system that would do that. And so when Plato, Pythagoras, and others were educated in Kemet, Pythagoras for 22 years, and went back and set up his own mystery system in Kemet, never writing a word because that was a prohibition in the Kemetic mystery system. He and Plato, who he was a major influence on, required geometry as a key system, mathematical system for admission to their system. And they also saw numbers as more than just material things, but also as having a spiritual component to it. So Kemet comes into being with all of this in place. How in the hell did this happen? How is it that the first dynasty of Kemet begins with a fully advanced philosophy, a highly educated priesthood, dig this, a census system? You got a government, you need to know how many people you got. Now, of course, old Trump, he was doing his best to discount in the census. That is, people of color, black people and people of color, because whites are declining now. They're going down the tube. So if they can reduce the count, then they reduce the amount that goes to states, the allocation of money and stuff. But more important, that's a game that they're playing to forestall their loss of power in this country. But the point is, 31, 32, 3300 BCE, Kemet's got them a census, and you better believe it was accurate because people there didn't lie. I have to admit, there was a whole lot of times they didn't even interview me on a census. I didn't want to be interviewed. You know, you can debate about that, but that's the truth. How is it that in the first dynasty, Kemet has one of the most advanced astronomical and astrological systems known to human history? And I pointed this out before. Herodotus noted that the Kemites gave birth to astrology, according to them. The Kemites told them that by the time, date, place, and year of a person's birth, they could foretell their life, their destiny, and what type of person they would be and how they would die. Now, I'm an astrologer, and I'm both a historical astrologer and a political one. We don't have the skill to do that, and I wouldn't want to be able to do that, to predict how people's lives would go. But they were advanced enough, apparently, to do it. But astronomy went along with astrology because physics and metaphysics, the spiritual and the non-spiritual go together, and they were never separate in the ancient system. So you could apply this to yourself. So some of the stuff I'm going to deal with today, some have heard this before, but some of you are going to have trouble with it because you've been spookified out of this. The Catholic Church has treated astrology as spookology. And as a result, a lot of people are afraid to touch it and see it as something that is not really real. And so some of you will have a little bit of trouble with this, but I'll be explaining this to the best of my ability, and hopefully you'll get it, you know. But astronomy is going to be one of the methods used in explaining how this system works, and particularly the ancient Kemetic past. So you've got the first dynasty, you've got a fully developed priesthood. Think about that. It takes a long time to develop. And it should be noted, and I, in a previous show, made this point, that the Kemites, and particularly the founders of Kemet, who we'll be discussing shortly, they were masters of astronomy. And there's a place in ancient Kemet called Nabta, N-A-B-T-A, Playa, P-L-A-Y-A. And my best friend, Andy Solawazi, had recommended this book to me, and you all should read it, The Origin Map. And what you're seeing, those circles are actually megaliths done by ancient Kemites. And these same megaliths, not as advanced, are found in England, you know, Stonehenge. And the historians, and I noted this in one of the series on the Twa, note that the Aryan or European did not build those. He said the Twa did. And we're going to see who these Twa were in dynastic Kemet. and pre-dynastic Kemet, particularly pre-dynastic Kemet. So this is one of the Stonehenges found at this place, Nabta Playa, which is close to where the Giza pyramids are today. And this is tracing the movement of the star system Orion. And those six upright slabs there, those duplicate Orion. And Orion is at the origin of the stellar system of our Milky Way, which is the neighborhood that we live in the stellar universe. And Orion is associated with Asar, because he's at the origin of Kemetic history. Africans are real interested in origin and in roots. And that's why if you're dealing with Dogon astrophysics or anything else, it tends to be more advanced than Western astrophysics because it is expert on origins. And as a result of its expertise on origin, it is able to deal with roots or foundations. So this show is going to focus on the roots of Kemetic civilization. Where did it start? Who brought it into being? And we're going to use a variety of types of evidence to support this. One of the most important questions we're going to answer is how the first dynasty comes into being with a fully formed governance system, a Pharaonic system. How did that happen? That is the high point of the presentation today, is where the governance system of Kemet came from. And key to that is a balanced family system or balanced social structure. This is the most important thing when it comes to civilization, is the family system that civilization rests on. So this is part of what we'll be addressing today. Now, I'm going to use some methods for historical analysis that some historians don't use, and I found very useful because they work. I'm a historian, political thinker, and philosopher. Those are three areas. And then there's a lot of stuff underneath that. The key thing is with the way I view history is I view it in a cyclical way because history moves in cycles. The way planets move elliptically, usually in a spiral motion, sometimes in a circular motion, then that is tied to how history moves cyclically. You have rise and fall. You have different stages in societies. And so one of the methods that I found very useful, and I use a lot of different methods for historical analysis, is astronomy and astrology, and particularly what's called the precession of the equinoxes, which I'm going to go into in a minute, which is a key aid in understanding the psychology, the philosophy, the history of a period, where people's heads were at a particular historical period. And one of the things that I find that is very interesting is that as above, so below, that the stellar stuff affects the whole world. So when certain cycles, what's called precession, that I'll explain in a minute, occur, you find the whole world going through a similar set of stages in history. And that's because it's like you have a geographical climate, or you have a biological reality, or you have a cellular structure, and those influence how people behave, think, and are. So you have an astronomical, astrological climate. And everything that's physical out there in the cosmos is spirit-based. And they all have energies. And so when I deal with precessional cycles, I'm going to be showing you how those abstract things that are determined by certain astronomical, astrological signs, their energies affect an age. And you'll see just how closely. It doesn't mean determines what will happen, but it creates the climate, creates the perimeters. It usually defines the general areas in which a society moves. Now, whether they move right or wrong, whether people make good choices or not so good choices, those are their, those are those to make, because in history, it's all about free will with human beings and with history. But this simply sets the climate for that. You can be born into a bad family situation. That could affect you for the rest of your life. But you can make choices to transcend that. You know what I mean? Similarly, you can be born now into some terrible situations in our community where families are broken down, communities are broken down. Whereas God told me we're going through a choice between two cultures. Powerful forces that have hit our community since '68 have put some of our people in a position where they're stepping outside their culture. Some of them are behaving not even like they're human. And it's created a crisis where life is so miserable that young people are considering suicide and are doing it. And Blacks have the lowest suicide rate in this country. But between 7 and 11-year-olds, as I pointed out before, their suicide rates, even though it's a small number, is higher than the white suicide rate. Why would a baby consider suicide? Because it's a sick, broken society that we're living in. But even though you're living in such a crooked, diabolical society, it doesn't mean you have to be a reflection of that. So when I deal with precessional cycles, I'm not saying this is the inevitable what had to happen. No, people had choices within that context. And in fact, the periods of greatest crisis in history are the periods of greatest growth. The 60s was a period of great crisis in this country. Black people were in struggle in the South and the North, went through a Black freedom movement, a Black power movement, a Pan-African movement, an Afrocentric movement, and so forth. And even though there was great crisis, some of our best thoughts and thinkers rose out of that. Malcolm X rose out of that. Activists, a King or an Ella Baker rose out of that, and an enrichment of our culture, soul music, the Temptations, Curtis Mayfield, Aretha Franklin, you know what I mean? The climate, which for those in power was chaotic, the disorder was a good thing for us because there was nobody that could really clamp down on us. They tried to, but we rose up. Just like enslaved Africans, when they said no, we said yes. When they said don't, we said we're going to do it. You know what I mean? That's been the resistant spirit of the African in America, the African around the world. So when I get into precessional cycles, I'm not saying, oh, this had to happen. No, In the end, you've got your own choices to make. And some of the people who come through the worst situations in life, some of those end up being some of the best people. You hear me? Some of the best people. Even when they fall in the pit and lose some mother wit, eventually they get out of the pit and get wise. And some of us don't and die. That's the tragedy of it. But we're not a tragic people. So what I'm going to cover out of this 10,000 year slice, and it's only an overview, is 5,000 years of ancient Kemetic history. Just an overview. It's just an overview. And I know some of you have got things to add to that. And so I'm going to use a number of different tools in this examination to understand this historical period. One tool, as I've just said, is astronomy. Another tool is eyewitness accounts. That is, people who are actually there and observe things. And one of the key eyewitness people for this period is Herodotus. But I'm going to cover, he's a Greek historian who traveled in Egypt and observed things and also was told things. But he always distinguished what he was told from what he saw. And he saw some very important stuff. So some of the evidence I'm going to use, some of it will come directly from him. And of course, it comes from the accounts of our own people. And it comes also from anthropology and archaeology. So I'm going to be looking at some of the finds of pottery and various things made during this 9,500 BC period to show who the people were, give you an idea of what was going on. You understand? This is an area I spent a lot of time on, you know, because it's the root. If we're really going to know ourselves and the strength of our civilization, you need to know where they come from. And Kemet was definitely the greatest achievement in classical civilization in urban settings in the world. The Chwa were the greatest achievers of civilization in human history. And I spent a lot of time establishing that. And if you doubt it, go back and look at it. I'll summarize it briefly in a minute, but for the most part, you need to look at that. But they're generally written out of history again. Just as ancient Kemetic history is ignored, the history of the world's first people that goes back from 149,000 to 200,000 years ago is ignored. And without that, you would not have this great civilization of Kemet or the great civilizations of Africa or the great civilizations that you find in many different parts of the world, especially those that were just. So I'll be using to cover a 5,000 year slice of this 10,000 year period, and I'm only hitting it on the top. I'll be using astronomy, eyewitness accounts, anthropology, archaeology. And I'm also, it'll surprise you, be using some PowerPoint for this analysis. And that PowerPoint is designed to give us an understanding of this ancient period. So this is some of the area that will be covered, and I've purposely taken some time, a couple of years, to lay a foundation for this particular presentation. So first thing that I want to do is, in looking at this, is start off with the Chwa contribution to the history of ancient Kemet. And it's that Chwa contribution that is extremely important, since that's the foundation for African history. And I want to start here. And this is my favorite picture. You have seen this before. This is a picture of the Kung people of Kalahari Desert, according to mitochondrial DNA. they are the world's first people. And then the Chwa of the Congo are second in terms of age. But mitochondrial DNA gives them a lineage going back 149,000 years ago, give or take 10,000 years. That's the error rate of mitochondrial DNA, which is the DNA of the mother. There would be no Kemetic history, no history of Africa, and no history of the world without these people and the Chwa of the Congo, who also made up part of the people who migrated into ancient Kemet. So the Chwa make certain contributions that are key to Kemetic civilization in the area of spirit, family structure, governance, medicine, astronomy, and other innovations in the arts and sciences. Now, the key to the Chwa period is this. The Chwa being the world's first people, and the Chwa series that I had on for a number of early shows, delved into why, first of all, the Chwa could create such just systems. And that's because they lived in a period that I would call a historic period of unicity or purity. And they call themselves the pure people, and they're not egotistical. They're just simply saying they were extremely, and still are, good people. And that goodness was the key. Their dedication to the truth, the living of the truth, was the key to their wisdom that endowed them with paranormal powers of the highest orders that enabled them to innovate civilization. First of all, to innovate human kindness as a standard for how people live. When John Henry Clark would use the term civil to define civilization, he was, on the one hand, using the most basic definition of civilization. I go well beyond that. Some of you have misinterpreted what I'm saying because some have said that's all I mean. No, you've been watching these shows? Hell no, a lot more. But it's at the foundation. That's the most important thing. When your behind goes upstairs and you go through the judgment, you ain't taking no money with you. You're not taking your car or your house with you. You understand? You're only taking one thing, your character. That's your eternal possession. And the Chwa, throughout history, have demonstrated the highest character because they, being God's first people, were closest to God and maintained a state of simplicity. And so a lot of us will reject this. Well, because they weren't living in pyramids or, they didn't build them. Actually, they did. That is, they built the civilization that built them. We'll come to that in a minute. But the fact of the matter is, they chose the simple path for a long period of history. So when you're getting into the higher spirit systems, whether it is the Hindu system or whether it's the spirit systems of Africa, the Ma'atan systems, or the systems of Native Americans or whatnot, they all have processes for getting you back in tune with your original nature and processes for overcoming the material realm and the physical realm that can bring you down. Passions like greed, jealousy, the material life. You know what I mean? So the Chwa live in this state of unicity where they're in oneness with God and oneness with nature. That's why they call themselves the pure people. And that is also why they had demonstrated and still to this day do demonstrate paranormal powers. That's why throughout Africa, a friend of mine who will be back on this show, Menu Ampin, he's been on the show before, and he's an expert on Martin Luther King, the revolutionary Martin Luther King. He's just completed 6 weeks of work in the Sudan. I'm going to have him on the show. He's going to do a slide presentation on his work in the Sudan. And he noted that in the Sudan, there's the wearing of the leopard skin. Well, if you look at the Twa, who end up being the founders of this ancient Kemet, their greatest healers wore the leopard skin. Now, many of them were healers, but the greatest ones, they wore the leopard skin. They innovated medicine. Dr. Theophil Obenga says that the people in Congo, Brazzaville learned medicine through the Twa. And they could heal a broken bone quick, but they had a spirit component to every physical component in their healing. In ancient Kemet, the priests who were doctors wore leopard skin. It comes from the Twa. And of course, in dynastic Kemet, Herodotus tells us that doctors were so good that they had a specialist for every illness in every part of the body. And so if you had a bone problem, then it was a bone specialist. It was for the arm or the leg, or a heart problem, because they understood the circulation of blood, the heart. Imhotep was the father of medicine, but the father of medicine to them was the Twa. And as I've just pointed out to you, in the Nabta Playa region of Kemet, where these stone hedges have been found, they were the ones who mastered astronomy during the pre-dynastic period, and particularly had a particular interest in Orion. So if you look at the pyramids that were built during the dynastic period, they are following the course of Orion that these ancient Africans had mastered. And some of these stone hedges found in Nabta Playa go back 16,500 years. That is, they were tracing the movement of Orion back 16,500 years. It doesn't mean they were there 16,500 years, but they knew the movement of Orion, which is the beginning of the stellar system in the Milky Way neighborhood that we live in. For you that are not into astronomy, the Milky Way is Earthlings, the people from Earth, stellar neighborhood. So the Twa introduced that. The Twa introduced spirit as a central feature of civilization. The Maasai say that they learned to worship God through the Twa. And the Twa give birth to the idea of one God, but not in the biblical or the Judaic or Islamic sense of just a teaching. The Twa had connection to God. They were pure people. And so, as I pointed out in a previous show, the Twa's conception of God is the most accurate of all, where God is described as these infinite forces, a part of which is distributed to everything God creates. Quantum physics confirms that everything in life is made up of energy. They don't understand this is a life force coming from God. And if they did, they wouldn't be involved in a mad project, mutual assured destruction, creating an atom bomb, because they have used energy only for the sole purpose of power. There's a comment here from M. Jewel. So leopard skin isn't necessarily associated to kingship or royalty, but medicine. It's essentially associated with medicine. Now remember, Pharaoh was chief priest, but in truth, he was not the highest healer in the kingdom. Those were priests that had that, and the highest in Kemet was Imhotep. Just as for us, the highest was George Washington Carver. He and Imhotep would have had some good conversations, and I bet they're having them in heaven, So the Twa give birth to that. I pointed out that in a previous show that the Twa played the role of civilizing the larger Africans. And particularly, I had a show dedicated to that. It was one of the shows during the New Year period where I was dealing with Twa ancestral power. And it was showing how the Twa took the Bantu people who come up from Southern Africa and civilized them. These are taller Africans. And they civilized them through teaching them against incest, proper way to have sex outside of your family line. They taught them how to make fire. They taught them how to smelt iron. They were into technology, and some of that technology was ahead of some of the later civilizations that would develop, and much more. The Twa also give birth to a governance system in which all the males and females are equally empowered to govern every phase of society. As I pointed out before, the Twa gave birth to democracy. Now, that term democracy comes from Greece. Greece only practiced it in a few city-states for a short period of time, and among only a few people, and then only males. But the African, because their lineage goes back to these Twa people that go back 144 to 200,000 years, this having a say-so in things is in our blood system. It's in our cellular structure. It's in our DNA. The African has to do things like that. Africa won't be straight until the people get their say-so, and especially sisters, because sisters have been moved out of power in Africa. And to the extent that they have in the U.S., the future of blacks in this country is also going to be based on the interplay and interaction and balance between males and females. So the Twa give birth to governments that are based on the equal empowerment of males and females. And I'll make mention of to the extent to which that was practiced in ancient Kemet. But for the purpose of this discussion, one of the most important contributions that the Twa make, being a just people, of course, is this notion of justice. They practice it, but I pointed out in previous shows that they term this Masuri, Maassouri. And that is the root of Ma'at. That meant straight, upright, just. That precedes Ma'at. I ran that past Obenga. He didn't object to it. But it wasn't just a concept. They practiced it 24/7. In Kemet and other African civilizations, they called for it. But as one of our viewers has pointed out, when you have a law, usually it's because it's been violated. And the Twa really didn't have laws that they had to follow because they were living in this era of simplicity where all their needs were easily met. Hunting, gather, activity took a very short period of time. And then you had leisure, and they lived in the real world as living, breathing, loving human beings. This picture you see of the father and his two children, I put that there, but of course it would be the mother, it would be the grandmother, and it was the affection and love that they had for each other. But the most important legacy that the Twa left the Kemites and Africa in general was the twin lineal legacy of all the males and females being equally empowered to govern every phase of society. To the extent that Kemet followed this, and it didn't always, then to that degree, you measure it based on the fact that there was balance between males and females. There was an equal empowerment. The Twa were at a near perfect level on this. Other societies would fall off a little. But the most just societies in Africa, because we like the big ones, were after hunter-gatherer, were the classless age-grade societies that were small, agricultural, where all the males and females at the village level had an equal say-so in governing every phase of society. So today, we try and get back to this purity the Chwa lived in it. And that's only part of their legacy. And you need to go to the works that we have today that enables us to try and recover some of this purity, meaning spirit works. Some people are using meditation works. In ancient Kemet, it was Jerumah work, Gerumaa, which was the person who was self-mastered. Or the Bombara, it was Ma work, M-A-A. Notice the near similarity in the term. That was the ideal person, the self-mastered person who mastered the forces within them. The Chwa didn't have to be taught that. To this day, they don't have to be. You know, so the Chwa laid the foundation for all of this. Now, one of the things that's very important in terms of understanding ancient Kemet is understanding how astronomy, astrology worked in understanding history in the lives of a people. And they were inseparable. So the Great Pyramids were astronomical observatories set along the course of a particular star, Orion being the most important. And I've been in the Great Temple, and some of you have, Khufu, which sits on the center of the earth. And as you walk up and down the passageway, that was an observation point for priests to observe stars. And so this is the picture of the Temple of Dendera in Kemet. And the Temple of Dendera, in the ceiling contains this drawing. This is one done in script, and it was blasted out and then put in the museum in France. And then there's another that is still in Kemet. And so the Temple of Dendera is here recording the astrological or zodiac signs. And this is tied into what's called precession of the equinoxes. I'm an astrologer. I've been one since 1963. I'm not going to give you a class on this. You won't understand how this works unless you actually do it. And I was somebody that was very suspicious of this. And it's only when my sister's godmother, who happened to be Mexican American, ran what's called a spot chart, which is a chart that you just needed an ephemeris, which is an astronomical table of the rotation of planets, where they are at any particular time. The best astronomical books are German, because they're very precise down to the minute, down to the millisecond. And so she took where my planets were when I was born and did a spot chart. Usually if I do a chart, it takes 30 hours to lay it out, translate it. Because astrology is basically the relationship, the angular relationship of planetary energies to each other. It's not just your sign. My sister, Sandrea Bradley, and I did a 3-part series on astrology. Go back and watch it. And you should check her out if you want your chart done. It is the best description of your destiny. Your chart is that path you picked in heaven. Your strengths and your weaknesses and a whole lot of other things, it's called your Ka. That's basically what your astrological chart is. And you may not know it, you have it. And as I said before, just because planets are in a certain place, you have certain strengths and weaknesses, does not dictate what you'll do. That's free will. As they say, you would say, the choice is to be or not to be, playing off of, Shakespeare. To be yourself or not to be. There's only 2 ways on that one, So this here, the Temple of Dendera, in the inner circle, you see all the astrological signs. Up on the left-hand top corner, you see the crab. That's Cancer. To my right is Sagittarius, a being holding a bow. And then to its opposite side is a lion, Leo. And then two fish, Pisces, and so forth. So the inner circle are the zodiacal signs. Now in Kemet, they had a particular name for each of these signs. I won't go through all of them because I don't think anyone has successfully translated each of these signs into the correct Kemetic terminology. So where it's accurate, you'll see me using it. But other than that, I won't, because I'm not going to invent something that doesn't work. On the outer level of this, you have the stars. So this is the basis for understanding as above, so below from an astronomical level, because we're all stars. We're all made up of the same components of the stars in heaven. And we have our own rotational movement, which is our life, which is our life path, based on choices, but also based on gifts. And so to know yourself is to know yourself on many levels. To know yourself as an African or whatever your ethnicity is. To know your family background and stuff like that. But at the same time, to know yourself is also to know the astronomical component. As Einstein said, the universe is not a crapshoot. Everything in this universe has a purpose. And I'm going to tell you, the most rewarding thing for self-knowledge when it's come to internal spiritual self-knowledge has been my own astrological chart. And it's not just where the planets were when I was born. I'll give you a few examples of how this works. And I'm not trying to convince people to follow astrology or anything else. Malcolm X was a Taurus. Sun was in Taurus, his moon was in Aries. Now in astrology, the relationship between sun and moon, the solely lunar relationship, is extremely important because those are the workhorses of the heavens for Earth. The moon is really a filter for the sun. The moon regulates the movement of tides and other things. And the sun is the source of life and energy and so forth. So the relationship of sun and moon when you're born has a lot to do with how you approach life. Malcolm had the solely lunar relationship of sun in Taurus, moon in Aries. Now, the way it goes in astrology is Aries, Taurus, Gemini, so forth. So it means Aries is right behind his sun in Taurus, right behind. There are a few master astrologers, and I'm not one of them, who have been able to break through on certain areas of astronomy astrology to where it works. So there's a guy named Dane Rudar. He ain't black, but he's very good. And what he did is he came up with the lunation cycle, and it works. I'm into what works. And so he showed, based on the stage of the relationship of the sun and the moon when you're born, that kind of structures you. Doesn't mean you'll do that, but it shows you your range of potential. So the fact that Malcolm's moon was in Aries and it was behind his sun, that had a special meaning. And what did it mean? It meant that the moon had gone through all its cycles except its last cycle, just before it would go in after that to Taurus, which would be a new moon. You can't hardly see a new moon, you know? So what did that mean? It meant having gone through all the previous cycles, if that person's a higher order person who's concerned about humanity, they're going to pick up the vibrations of all these previous cycles. And they have the potential to be prophetic. my best friend, Kehinde Solowazi, has this thing, and I pointed out in previous shows, he's prophetic. Malcolm X was prophetic. I know plenty of people that have this solely lunar relationship who are not. One reason may be that they're wrapped up more in their own lives, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're raising a family and doing a job and stuff, and they may not be dedicating their lives to a bigger cause. And then some are, and they still don't demonstrate this prophetic capacity. So this is one of the things the solely lunar relationship indicates. The ability to prophesize. Malcolm had that. And at the same time, Garvey had that. And Garvey's moon and sun were in the same sign, Leo. But his moon was behind his sun. So he was still in this last solely lunar phase. He was prophetic. Malcolm X prophesied the rise of urban rebellions. He said it'll be hand grenades this year and it'll be something more next year. He prophesied the rise of Black power and Pan-Africanism. Garvey prophesied the rise of World War II and the involvement of Japan in that war, pretty precise, and that Africa would have this opportunity to free itself from colonialism, all of which was right. So this is the nature of what this is when it comes to a person. What I'm dealing with here is precessional cycles. And precessional cycles deal with the impact of these signs and the relationship of the Earth to the zodiac that I'm going to explain, that affects whole people. So just as the solely lunar relationship affects you, for example, with me, my sun is in Leo. My moon is in Pisces. Pisces comes after Aquarius. Had I had a moon in Aquarius, then I would have been in a cycle like John Coltrane, which can be a very creative cycle, you know, but it usually indicates solely lunar conflicts. There's a 180-degree opposition between sun and moon. Sun rules the masculine, moon rules the feminine, you know. So Coltrane had issues to work out in his family life. He's one of the masters I study in the book on Seva. And he was an average musician, but through practice became extraordinary. And when he did, he became an innovator. From somebody that could barely play, had only one natural musical gift, which was wisdom, he innovated 4 schools of music, showing you that the stars don't just dictate, your discipline does, baby. You know what I mean? Huh? You can take something average and be extraordinary if you work at it. In my case, because the moon comes after the full moon, what that indicates is people in that phase are disseminators. That is, they like to share what they know. But I happen to have also been able to be privileged to do innovation. But that's taken hard work. So that's in part how it works with the person. It's the relationship of planets to each other. It's not just your sun sign. And so here we're going to look at what's called precessional cycles tied to this. I'll come back to this in a minute. So this is an example of how precession of the equinoxes work. You have here the Earth in its orbit, and it has a 365-day-a-year orbit, you know, around the sun. And so that's the Earth axis, its rotation. Precession of the equinoxes describes a 26,000-year rotation, subdivided into 2,100 years. And so the way the earth is inclined towards any one of these zodiacal symbols, whether it's Leo right now, um, astrologers generally agree you're at the end of Pisces, the beginning of Aquarius. And so this is an age where you're going to see religious confusion, for example. Look what's going on in Iran. Look at all these mega right-wing Republicans. You know what I mean? Look at the Supreme Court decision on abortion, where they're treating a woman's right to choose whether they'll carry life or not as some kind of religious law enacted by some of the most lawless, dishonest creatures on the planet, Supreme Court justices, who gave us George Bush II, that gave us Iraq and Afghanistan off of an arbitrary Supreme Court decision. So if you're looking at this age, you're transiting between this Piscean age, which is more religious oriented. That doesn't mean high, because a lot of wars were fought in the name of religion. John Henry Clark called the three monotheistic religion male killer cults. Because a lot of blood was shed in the name of God, and of course, in the name of capital and money. So that's because, what I'll explain in a minute, the Earth's precession of the equinoxes is pointed towards Pisces, and now it's shifting into Aquarius, which means you're going to see a lot of upheaval, and it's beginning. This past century was a century of upheaval. You had the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, and today you have upheaval caused by this mad science that has waged war on nature. And so as a result, global warming, floods, extreme weather patterns, and everything else. This is not a revolution caused by Pisces or Aquarius. This is caused by the misuse of science, a mad science that's out to control nature rather than living in harmony with nature. So this is an example of how the Earth's relationship to one of these zodiacal signs has an influence for approximately 2,100 years out of this 26,000 year cycle on what happens on Earth. The key thing to note is when you're going through certain historical periods, you will see the whole world is generally going through those periods. When you go through the period of royalty and kings and queens, you had various kinds, but it was all over the planet. You had the best mankind or a woman that comes out of Africa, where that person didn't have sole power over everything. They were accountable to a people. That's what I call royal democracy. But then you had these autocracies in Europe, and then you had the emperors in China, and then you also had royal systems among some Native Americans, particularly the Mesoamerican ones, the Mayans, Aztecs, Incas, Toltecs. Same things going on. What's causing that? People making choices. Culture is helping to drive it, which astrology does not have anything to do with. Your culture is something you create, So this is that. So what is the precession of the equinoxes? And I spent a little time trying to explain this, and at least I hope you get the essence of what this is. The precession of the equinoxes is like a spinning top. And I'll go back to one of the right here. This is like a spinning top. And you'll see this is how the Earth behaves when it is going through precession of an equinox or the equinoxes. It's like a top spinning, and you see it spinning from side to side. So what is a precession of the equinoxes? What it is the gravitational pull of the gravitational force of the sun and the moon on the Earth's rotation. And so as these two planets pull on the earth, it tries to pull the earth into an upright position, like straight up here. Straight up here. And that's not going to work because it's got to be an elliptical motion or a circular motion. And so precession works like a spinning top. It doesn't spin up. It spins to the right angle, to the right side, and from angle to angle, from side to side. And that's because of the gravitational pull of the sun and the moon on the earth. And so it pulls this in relationship to the zodiac right here. So right now, you're in this area here, Pisces, but it is being transformed into Aquarius. It's transitioning. So you're seeing the beginning of one and the end of the other. You're seeing the confused rebellion in the Capitol. That would be an example of a transition that is based on bull, and that whites feel they're being dispossessed because blacks are winning elections and putting people in office, including a black president that shouldn't have been there. It's theirs. And the biggest dispossessor of all, and psychologically, was Donald Trump. You know, everything is due to a conspiracy, Mr. Know Nothing. So instead of the earth being pulled in a clockwise direction, which it does in its rotational path, and it's January, February, March, April, January, it's going from Aries to Taurus to Gemini when it's in the cyclical thing, but January is Capricorn and February is Aquarius and so forth. It is following a order that is in its orbit, that basically is its orbit. And so when you're really beginning with the beginning of this, it starts with Aries, then it goes to Taurus, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, you know, or Pisces. So that's the way it goes. But when it's being pulled by these two gravitational forces, the sun and the moon, it precesses backwards. That's what precess means. And so instead of going from Cancer to Leo, it goes from Leo to Cancer to Gemini, which is going to be the 3 cycles that I'm going to look at for this particular historical period. And that's what's called precession. And you're going to see that there's a correspondence between those signs and the energies that they emit and what's going on Earth. And I want to say again, people have choices. So it's not saying that this is dictated by what's going on there, but it's definitely influenced. It's a climate. It's an environment. It's an astronomical, astrological energy climate. So when the Earth precesses, it precesses through the 12 zodiacal signs, and the overall precession is 26,000 years. Now, that's not actually accurate. It's a little bit less, and it varies a little bit. But 26,000 years is the precession through these 12 zodiacal signs with the sub-cycles of 2,100 years approximately. Because if you add it up, you'll see that's less than that. But each cycle isn't even. You know, that's how life moves. It's uneven. As the Earth changes in its precessional cycle, in relationship to these different signs that are overhead, then the climate on earth when it comes to um, the spiritual, philosophical issues that come out of a sign are going to be affected by that. So in the case of the Pisces age, the Piscean age had a heavy religious overtone to it over a 2,100 year previous period. You had empires rising based on religion, and wars fought over it. And sometimes it was peaceful, but in other times it was warlike. And you had them all over the planet Earth. A lot of blood was shed on this, and a lot of emphasis was placed on this. People's lives were dedicated to this. And so that's the nature of these processional cycles. And so what I want to go through now is how this worked in terms of understanding ancient Kemet. And the focus is going to be on the 10,000 year period starting 10,000 BC. And then that subcycle that goes on for approximately 2,100 years. And so we're going to start with the first subcycle in ancient Kemetic history. And so what was that subcycle? In the precession of the equinoxes, where the sun and the moon is pulling the earth into this wobble like a top, it is now pointing, the earth is pointing towards the zodiacal symbol of, guess what? Leo. And so what happens then is that with this gravitational pull, the Kemetic priests who are looking at this, they're able to notice something, because what we note from this zodiac again is, as the priests are looking at the zodiac, and particularly they're taking a look at the movement of stars as they're tracking them as astronomers. What they're noticing is that with the rising and setting of different stars over time, they're changing their place as they appear on the horizon. They don't appear at the exact same place. And over time, this would tell them this is precession. So the Kemites knew about the precession of the equinoxes. They had been around it almost, at least 10,000 years. So they had a lot of time to observe this, and they kept records of everything they observed. So what does the precession of the equinoxes have to do with the 10,000 year origin of Kemetic history? Well before this 3200 to 31 or 3300 BC period. So at the time in which 10,000 BC occurs, and I want to stress this, Sheikh Anta Diop agrees that if you're going to trace the origin of Kemet, you got to go back 10,000 BC. That's the time period when the so-called Greek wise man Solon comes to Kemet after inaugurating reforms in Greece, and he has conversations with the great priest of Kemet. The great priest of Kemet tells Solon that he's a child, that the Greeks are not elders, meaning they're young people. They don't have enough experience to have wisdom. And Solon says that the history of Kemet can go back to written records 8,000 BC. And he said overall knowledge that has been passed on through the priesthood to 9,000 BC. So there's a general agreement that this 10,000 BC period is like a starting point. And so, what do we find then in 10,000 BC? The precessional cycle caused by the Earth and Sun's gravitational pull, the Sun and the Moon's gravitational pull on the Earth, puts it in the precessional cycle of Leo, which is exactly east of the Milky Way, which is in Earth's stellar neighborhood. So it's in this ancient 10,000 BC historical period that the precession of the equinoxes is in Leo, that this great structure is built. Like a lion, you can see the nose was shot off, got a big African nose, and with the back, it could be the mane of a lion, could be the crown of a pharaoh, you know. Now, one of our great scholars is getting ready to put out a book on this period of history, Dr. Finch, and he argues that this statue is of a woman. And if it is, then that would say something really specific about this particular period of history. But what's important to note is that the precessional cycle of Leo during this period is constructed a lion, which Leo is the symbol of Leo is a lion structure of huge proportions, one of the great wonders of the world. And so it is during this period that this structure is created, indicating that the precessional cycle, the climate of this time, inspired this kind of creation. Now, this is telling you a lot. The ancients, that is, the people who lived during the dynastic period, knew nothing about how this was built, exact time in which it was built, or the civilization that built it. But clearly, it took a great civilization to build a structure like this. And it was obviously a structure that embraced the people that built it, extolled them. And so for pharaohs that would come in the dynastic period, they considered this a sacred spot, you know, and they would go there to worship. And some pharaohs had insights that came from this. Now, what we also know is that during this period, after this Sphinx was built, the erosion around it indicates that water, all of this area here, that water had eroded it. So after it was built, there was some flooding of the Nile that came up high on this statue. And so we know that this is a period of great creativity and great ancient nature. And this is the opening of Kemetic civilization. And this is between 10,000 and 9,000 BC in its creation. Now, I'll go back to these others. During this same period, the people of this period, 9,500 BC, these are some of the implements they made. These are all flint work. And you can see some of these are arrow points, you know. And the Twa were good at hunting. In the beginning, they were hunter-gatherers. We're going to see that this is a branch of the Twa we're talking about here. And then you see other forms of flint work here, you know. Now, what's amazing about, and I studied this, a lot of the artifacts during this period, there's hardly a weapon during this period. You could call these weapons, but these are largely hunting weapons. You're not going to see what you see when you go into Europe. Sharp-pointed spears and knives and every kind of weapon you can think of. There are few, but very few. This is early ancient pottery. And what you're seeing is, like in most civilizations, the pottery evolves in terms of its design and style. And so this is very basic, this kind of style here, not very evolved. This is kind of interesting, this right here, you know. But basically, you're seeing a very basic thing. Now, here's the thing to note. In almost all of these carvings, you find natural combs. And these natural combs are almost always made out of ivory. So that's telling you something else. And they're not only using ivory for natural combs. Who uses natural combs? Double old soul, us. You know what I mean? Huh? If you go into the finds in Europe to go back a fair amount of time, you're not going to find a single natural comb. Of course, you're not. You know. Now, a key thing to note here is the Venus figure here. This is showing you the sacred nature of the woman, and particularly the woman with the big behind, the large size, which in African standards of beauty, this is the African standard of beauty, by the way, when an African woman, traditional times and even sometimes now, before she was going to get married, they put her in a fat farm so she could gain weight, because beauty was conceived as a big woman, big mama, you know. The blues have songs about that, what the big mama is going to do. But the key thing is, this is a sacred symbol. These women here were conveyors of spirit power. And in fact, all of these objects here, their main purpose was ritual purposes for sacrifice. And then, of course, carrying grain for food, you know. You can see the presence of a few foreigners here. Those aren't Africans. You'll see a few of those. And again, things that are used to hold things, usually made out of ivory. These are usually made out of ivory. So one of the characteristics of this 9,500 BC pottery is it's just being shaped. It's not hardly artistic, but you're going to see where it is. Look at this. First of all, a boat with oars. I'm going to tie this in later into the people who founded Kemet and what they did in its founding. But in dynastic Kemet, you didn't have hardly any wild animals. So this is telling you during the ancient period, you had giraffes and other animals. And then you were growing grain. And then again, you see the pottery is becoming more evolved, you know. Again, the Venus figure. Now, what's interesting here is a big woman with the big hips, but it's the scare and the breasts. And this is ivory. But what's key is the scarification, which is telling you this is a person who's gone through initiation. This is clearly African. You hear me? Clearly African. And then you're seeing the other shapes of pottery. And then again, flint. And here you could say, well, yeah, this is something you could stick somebody with. But very few of these. You find very few of these. And then again, the ivory natural comb. And what in the early period is important, very often characterized by the bird. Now, Petrie is considered the authority, a guy named Petrie. I don't consider him an authority. He's got some good material to look at, but what he does when he interprets these evidences of these ancient African people is he refers to this as European. These objects come from Europe. And when it's obviously a big mama, he calls them slaves. There were no slaves in Kemet at that time. Slavery gets introduced when the Hyksos are thrown out. Some of them remain as slaves. You know what I mean? This whole story that slaves built the pyramids and everything else, bull. Not true. So he whitens this whole history, and we're talking 9,500 BC here. There's no evidence of the Aryan 9,500 BC. So how in the hell could it be them? You know what I mean? But that's their attempt to rewrite history, but it won't work. Okay, so what you're seeing then in these processional cycles, and from the evidence here, I'm showing you some carvings and stuff, you're getting an idea of the creativity of the people. And you're seeing that these are people that have an appreciation for beauty. And these signs that you're finding on this kind of pottery is an interesting indication, because in Kemetic, it's called art, but they had no concept of art because everything in Africa was spirit-based. In Kemet, you had carvings of people that were actual representation of the person. And then you had the abstraction, which was symbolic. So you could have a human being with the head of the falcon on it. And so that is telling you that this person is of a royal nature. You know, Horus descended to be, if it's a young man, to be Pharaoh or Pharaoh, you know. So what you have is abstraction and symbolism mixed. But here, you know, you're seeing this inclination that would be developed. And this particular feature here is characteristic of art or carvings found in the rocks among the Chwa people, you know. So this is the nature of some of what was going on at this time. It's telling you these are creative people. They're living peaceful lives. Women are very central, and they care enough about their hair. They're going to comb it, not just with a natural comb, but an ivory natural comb. Of course, now you're all going to put that down because you're killing elephants. But in this case, it was hunting. They weren't killing off species of animals, you know. And you might say, well, this indicates that there was royalty during this period. Not necessarily, because our people have always had a sense of being royal to begin with. You know what I mean? So they didn't have to have royalty at this time to show that. So this is the processional cycle of Leo, and a 10,000 year period. So as the cycle shifts and you go into what in the Western system would be called Cancer, because it's going backwards from Leo to Cancer rather than Cancer to Leo, because it's going backwards. In Kemet, Kepra approximated Cancer. And Kepra is my netter. This ring right here is the beetle, you know. And I have beetle symbols all over the place. Right here, this I always have seated, sitting right in front of my computer, you know. The beetle pushing up the sun, Kepra or Kepri. They have different ways of pronouncing it. So this slide here is Kepra pushing the sun. It is indicating that this cycle that occurs around 7,900 BC when the Earth's gravitational pull of the sun and the moon is pulling it towards the sign of Kepler, or in the West, Cancer. Now, Kepler symbolizes the union of masculine and feminine, and it symbolizes the sun at sunrise. And so, symbolizing the union of masculine and feminine and the sun at sunrise, it symbolizes creativity coming through the union of masculine and feminine. Kepler, in theory, was taught throughout Africa and in Kemet to be androgynous. They knew it wasn't, but treating it as though two sexes were combined in one beetle. It was not, but it was symbolizing that, because that's the basis for creativity. So this would indicate that this period of 7,900 BC was a period of creativity and a period in which women probably wielded a great deal of power. And it should be noted, as I note, and I'm going to go into this in a minute in another way, that Kemet was twin lineal. That is, lineage coming from mother and father, inclining towards the female. And so a person's last name came from the mother. The head of the family was the mother's eldest brother. And it was the women who were the agriculturalists of ancient Kemet. They chose among them one called Shepsut, Shepsut. That's where the term Hatshepsut comes from. You never know it by studying dynastic history. And so Kemet's economy was based on the female, and the female ran the marketplace. The men were at home making clothes, or they tended cattle, the everyday men. But the women tended the field, and when a parent was sick, it was the daughter that was responsible for caring for the family. So it was heavily female-centered. So this period of creativity, women would have had great power in this period, males and females. This is the twin lineal legacy of the Trois, but inclining towards the females. And it is very likely that this is before the Pharaonic civilization. And the reason I say that is it would take a long time to build a Pharaonic civilization, and a lot of choices that these Africans would have to make, because it would in some ways be a departure from their way of life before. So when I identify these people, you'll see why this is probably the case. But this had to be a very creative period. And again, it's why the objects that you saw preceding this, there's hardly any weapons. It's a peaceful period. Though they lived in enclosed areas to protect themselves from any strangers that might do them harm. They were prepared to defend themselves. But this was not a warlike civilization. Now, as the precessional cycles change, it moves from Cancer, or Kepler the beetle, 7,900 BC for 2,100 years approximately. You go into the precessional cycle in the West, it's called Gemini, but I know correctly for the Kemites would be Shu Tefnut. And these are the twins in Kemet. Just as Gemini represents twins, Shu Tefnut are the twins who separated heaven from earth. And this period here begins around 5,800 BC. Now, I want you to note, because now we know more about this period, and so we can show the conformity between the symbolism of Shu Tefnut, representing twinness, the cooperation between two forces. You see one that is a female lioness and the other a male, their cooperation. And so this idea of twinness clearly reflects what's going on historically during this particular historical period. Because what's happening during this historical period? You have the emergence of pharaohs, and they're wearing two crowns. And you're going to see the first pharaoh in a minute. They're governing twin kingdoms of the south with its capitals in a place called Nekhen or Nekhen, Nekhen, and Nekheb, Nekheb. Twin capitals. Notice the sign is twin, and what's happening is twin governance, twin capitals. The kingdom of the north is the twin capital of DEP and PE. This is the historical period where the historical philosophy, that is, the deep philosophy of Kemet is fully formed. And it is a philosophy of twinness and unicity. And so, as I pointed out before, it is cosmic logic that Africans are operating on before. I have shows that deal with this, how you make the lower mind, the despiritualized mind of spirit, subordinate to the higher mind of spirit. And in Kemet, they were never separated. And so, whereas life and death is separate in the Kemetic mentality or philosophy, life is slow dying. Death is a rebirth to a new life. The Kemites were the first to discover that the soul is eternal. And all great systems teach this. That Ba that's inside of you, that's God inside of you. That's the eternal part of you that will live forever, So this is a period where what's going on above is what's going on below. Hello, are y'all getting any of this? So I'm breaking this down. I mean, you don't need to know astrology. And someone asked, how can they learn astrology? Someone gave them a tip, and you go to the click in. When you watch the show, click in, and you'll see the address of my sister. She can train you in astrology. I got no time for that. She's a master of that, Sandrea Bradley, and she does that for a living. And when you do something for a living, then, you get really good at it, especially when you have a gift, and she has a gift. Higher Hecka here has, back in the house, huh? Precession, 26,000 year cycle. How long were ancient Kemites here to observe and understand the time cycle? Longer than 26,000 years? We know for sure 10,000. And we also know from the megaliths that are found near Giza, they actually trace the orbit of the stars, particularly Orion, back 16,500 years. It doesn't mean they were there then, but it means they knew the cycle, the length of the cycle. So, but the Twa was there for the whole time. They observed this many times. They're the authors of this, and we're going to see in a minute who the founders of Kemet was, conclusively. You're going to see why I don't use the term when I'm referring to this ancient period as pre-dynastic. Hell no. You know what I mean? So I can't say exactly when did the Kemites come here. And by the way, the migratory routes would have been along the Nile Valley, and they would have definitely come from the Congo, where the second oldest Twa come from, and would probably also come from the Kun, coming out of the Kalahari Desert. they were the first to migrate into Europe. And in all likelihood, they were the first, along with their close ancestral people, the Biaka Chwa, that come from the Congo. And Diop himself notes that migratory route. And by the way, the geography of Kemet is going down, you know. So it's not the way you would think it would be. So they'd be going down the Nile into Kemet. The brother that woke me up, Norman K. Brown, teach, brother, loves you, woke me up, and now he's telling me to teach. Right on, Norman. Norman's still the person I go to at advice. I'm in a trap and can't get out of it. I call Norman. Hey, thanks, Norman. Glad you're in the house, brother. You know what I mean? One of my favorite people, you know? So, who were the founders of ancient Kemet? Oh, that's the question. Uh-oh. Now, some of you have heard me refer to this before, but not this way. I don't repeat myself. I don't go and give the same speech twice. You know what I mean? I don't do that. So I'm going somewhere else with this. So who were the founders of ancient Kemet? The founders of the ancient Kemet were the Anu, A-N-U, Anu, which means the great ones. Which is these 4 vertical registers on the top there, you know? That means in Medu Neter script, great ones. Hello. Now, that's a statement in and of itself. You see, Muhammad Ali said, I'm the greatest before he became so. But he established the fact that he was at least one of the greatest heavyweights. Most boxing experts say Sugar Ray Robinson was the greatest boxer ever. And what tends to reaffirm that one is Muhammad Ali patterned his style after Sugar Ray Robinson. And when he knocked Sonny Liston flat to the ground, the person who was there at the weigh-in and the person who was there at the victory was Sugar Ray Robinson. And one of his best people was assigned to, of course, it was Muhammad Ali's choice to work with him, coined the term, what is it? Fly like a butterfly, sting like a bee, Muhammad Ali. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad Ali had a grace of a middleweight, but more important, the character of a heavyweight human being, though someone has pointed out he wasn't perfect and he had some shortcomings. But his character stands. That's what made him strong, his character. And that's what makes us strong as a people. So based on my research, I conclude that it's incorrect to define the period of Kemetic history from 10,000 BC to 3,400 or 32 or 3,100 as pre-dynastic. Why? Use common sense. I'm going to show you in a minute. Because it is the Anu that gave birth to the first pharaohs, that gave birth to the dynasty. So how can this be pre-dynastic? Huh? And it was the Anu who, in creating this dynastic system, created all the other elements of Kemetic civilization. That's what entitles them to say that they're the great one. The Book of the Dead, Anu, the priesthood of Ani, I'll get into in a minute what that represents. You know, all the great works, Anu. Tehuti was Anu. He is the one credited with most of the inventions during this ancient period. Anu. Uh-oh. Now, so the correct terminology for this period is a historical period. I didn't invent this. I'm not doing this. I don't do that. You know what I mean? I'm defining what they said they were. This is the historical period of the great ones, and the only ones greater than them were the ancestors that gave birth to them, the Twa, because the Anu are agrarian Twa, who decided to experiment not only with agriculture, which the Twa gave birth to, but with urban civilization, which is what white people define as civilization, as though if you live in any other kind of society, you wouldn't be civilized. And so many of us are into the material thing. If it ain't got something equal to a skyscraper, it isn't civilized. Well, these savages have got big skyscrapers. The Germans were one of the most advanced when it came to technology and everything else. And look what they did. But they were copying America, whose society, that is Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf and everything else, wiping out everything that was different. They were copying America, as spelled with Amerikka. Huh? So if we're looking at this period, it's a period of the great ones. Well, when it comes to urban civilization, their achievements were the greatest of all. You hear me? Now, the name Anu, according to Dr. Sheikh Anadiat, derives from the god An, A-N, who was Asar, Osiris. Uh-oh. That's common because it's common for African people to situate their civilization in the founders or founder. And they might name the civilization after the founder. And so Asar is, according to dynastic Kemites and others, is the first pharaoh, is the founder, and played the same role that the Twa played in Africa, in the Niger-Congo Bantu region, the show that I gave on ancestral power. They were civilizing the wild Bantu people, the taller people who lived in society centered on females. They were democratic, they were agrarian, but they didn't know the first thing about civilized behavior. They didn't know about prohibitions on incest. The Twa taught them. They didn't know how to cook meat. They were eating it raw, you know what I mean? But they were not bad people. But they had to be refined. That was the role that Asar played in Kemet. He said he took the people from the wild state, and this was both Asar and Aset. It took them from the wild state to the civil state. You know? So the Anu are the founders of ancient Kemet, and the title of Asar was also Ani, A-N-I, which also Anu is derived from, Ani. And it's the priesthood of Ani where the great powers were expressed, spiritual powers and whatnot. And they still maintain a priesthood of Ani during dynastic Kemet. Flinders Petrie, who I generally don't quote, but on this one I will, makes this observation of the Anu. He says this. He says, from Giza and Turah, T-U-R-A-H, for 350 miles, there is no difference in the proto-dynastic work. He's referring to this ancient period. And the same is true of the earlier prehistoric times for more than 300 miles from Gerza to Naquata. Moreover, 200 miles further south in Nubia, the cycles of this age are perfectly continuous, although mixed with other types, which belong to Nubia. Thus, for over 500 miles, the prehistoric, this is the ancient Anu civilization, seems to have been so well organized and unified that the same taste, ideas, patterns, and materials prevailed throughout, This shows that there were not isolated and warring tribes which prevented intercourse and trade, but rather a peaceful, if not a unified, rule over all Egypt and Nubia. How is it that you look at this dynastic period and you don't look at the founders who had unified the country longer than the dynastic period and in a peaceful state, and out of that created virtually all the elements of Kemetic civilization other than pyramid building? I'd say that that was the real contribution of dynastic Kemet, is that they built pyramids, So who were the founders? They were Anu, Now, I've explained this before. When I was writing this book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, I read Petrie's work, and I read his translation of this cover. This cover, this picture, is the best proof of who the founders were. And note, it depicts the founders, what they look like, but also in Medu-Neter script. So you're seeing the writing of ancient Kemet. I don't read Medu-Neter. I can tell you a few symbols, but I don't read it. So I go to people with the expertise. And Obenga is the foremost one. I had him out at state. So I asked Obenga to translate this. Obenga does not study the ancient period. So this was all news to him. And I questioned whether Petrie was accurate in his description or translation of this symbolism right here. So this was Petrie's translation. He says, in Hemen, Hemen, city, Hemen is the name of a city. This is Obenga translating him. But Petrie says himself that Hemen was the name of the god Tupian, 13 miles south of Luxor. There is a contradiction. So he's first of all saying that what Petrie is saying is confused. He's confusing himself between a city named Hemen and a god who's called Tupian. It's not clear. He goes on to explain, Obenga, that Petrie's interpretation, this is his reading of this symbol here, that Petrie's interpretation that Terra Netta is the name of a chief. So Petrie is saying this person here is Terra Netta. This person here is Terra Netta. So Obenga, and so he's a chief, and he poses a problem because he says, quote, Obenga, Netter or God is almost never included in a proper name, even royal names. Uh-oh. Huh. So a human being wouldn't have the name Netter. So this is Obenga's summation of Petrie's interpretation with the following conclusion. Palace of the Anu, A-N-U, in Hemen, H-E-M city. Terra Netta means what exactly? The name Terra Netta is not in opposition with Palace of Anu. Therefore, Petrie's translation is not clear at all. Obenga's translation of this Medu-Neter script is as follows. This one, he says, the great ones of the palace and the city of the god Hemen, who show respect for the god that is the king of Kemet. The great ones, these three registers, the great ones, one of whom is this one, has come to worship the god who is this one, who is not Horus. This is Set. And when I showed you the pictures of natural combs, that was Set on the top of it. That's telling you this historical period. So this one is a great one who has come to worship the god in the palace of Hemen. So Abenga goes on to show that how he reached his translation, that the three vertical registers means great ones. And then palace or temple, worship or show respect, netter or god. So this is not a netter here, but this one has come to show respect to the god, the netter, not Lord Terra Netter. So what Petrie missed and Obenga grasped was that the Great One had come to worship and show respect for a being greater than himself, the God that is the king of Kemet. The king or pharaoh, which also meant great house, was the state of Kemet. And really, Kemet had no state, because state in the Western concept means instruments of violence. That's your army, your police, your National Guard, your intelligence agency, FBI, CIA, all of this. In the West, that's how they govern, because they're stealing from the people. And if you steal from the people, your state has to force them in line. Obenga and I talked about this, that in ancient Africa, most African societies had no armies. First of all, they were living in peace, and their leaders had no reason to have an armed guard or anything else, because they were living justly. They weren't ripping the people off. You hear me? Huh? And so what you find then is this idea of state. Pharaoh was symbolic of the government, and Pharaoh was considered God. So the king or pharaoh, great house, was the center of government of Kemet, as this relief indicates. The Anu had established a Pharaonic system of governance during this ancient period. Moreover, these ancient pharaohs were Anu or Chwa. Do you see this? These were Chwa who had decided to experiment with governance and building urban civilization. They had decided to experiment with that. And so these same little people transformed themselves into the founders of this civilization. So the Chwa start off history as hunter-gatherers without kings and queens, and then experiment with agrarian democracies as they begin to move into agriculture. And then larger Africans come out of that, and they experiment with that. But the key point is the governing principle was all the males and females being equally empowered to govern every phase of society. So in the small societies of Africa coming after the hunter-gatherer period, the villagers ruled those societies, and those were the most just to live in after the hunter-gatherer. And my reasoning is that this period prior to pharaohs, you had that same input, males and females. And I found out something else. While Asar was married to his sister, so you had royal incest, and that was because then he could assume power through the line of the woman, because the woman carried royal power. There's a period in Kemet, and it may have been after Asar, where things changed for a while, where the Shepsuits picked the pharaohs, and there were many pharaohs picked under this system. Females picked the males. And this is similar to the system you find in Ghana, where you have the Asantehene Asantewa. There was a period in Ghana where women ruled. The Bono Kingdom, Bono, women ruled. Then a time where war came, and so they shifted to a dual stool system, that is, where Queen Mother Asantewa and a king, an Asantehene, co-ruled under the leadership of a council that made the ultimate decisions, who represented the lineages in the villages. They were lineage heads. They were the most just among the lineage heads, the ones that didn't lie, didn't steal, didn't curse, didn't abuse women or children, that were brave in war parties. One among them would become Pharaoh. Leadership in Africa was determined by best man, not this stuff that you see in Wakanda and stuff where they're fighting each other for control. No, that isn't how it worked. It was based on the qualities. So in the case of the Asantehene Asantewaa Ghana system, the Queen Mother nominated the king, the Asantehene. She had 3 nominations, and at least one of those was always, accepted by the council for kingship or Asantehene-ship. She and the council then trained the king, and the king had to give up his wealth. He was decked always in gold and all of this refined stuff. It didn't belong to him. It belonged to the people. And he did not make the final decision. The council did. So there's a period in Kemetic history, starting with this period here of Shu Tefnut, where the pharaoh was picked by the women. That's a male-female governance system. That would later change. That's generally not noted. And I'll say this again. You measure the level of civilization by the power of the balance between males and females, the balance of power between males and females. When they are equally empowered, you're going to have a just society. And to the extent that either one is downgraded, you're going to have injustice. So the Anu are the founders of ancient Kemet, going back 10,000 BC. One of the key characteristics of the Anu, when you see the Anu being depicted, or here, only they are depicted in the Pharaonic status. All other people who are not Anu are portrayed in a servile status. So this is real key. Now, who was Asar? Now, I'm the first one to say this, and I think I got backup for this. This is Asar. You've seen, some of the people who watched the show before, you have seen me use this before. And notice, this is a real person. This is not a general carving that would just be a carving of just, could be anyone. And if you look at some of the carvings of pharaohs in the dynastic period, like the Ramses statues, these are superhuman carvings. That's not the way Ramses actually looked. They didn't have no gym where you're lifting weights. These guys here are muscle bound. But if you look at the pharaoh Akhenaten, that is a real portrayal of how he looked. He had a little pot belly and wasn't muscular. That was him. This is him. And how do I know this is him? This comes from Herodotus on history, where he describes the way in which the Kemites kept records of both their chief priests and pharaohs. And this comes from eyewitness account, in that he could actually see this. So page 131 and 132, Herodotus on history. He's referring to how the priest kept a record of all their rulers going back to the beginning. and also kept a record of their chief priest, both of them. And what he notes is that this was a record that consisted of 10,000 years of the history of chief priests and pharaohs. And he even went as far as to say 11,340 years, but generally it's a 10,000 year period of history where he says, thus far I have spoken on the authority of the Egyptians and their priests. They declare that from their first king to this last mentioned monarch, the priest of Vulcan was a period of 341 generations. Such, at least they say, was the number of both of their kings and their high priests during this interval. And then he goes on to say this was a period of 10,000 years. And then he goes on to make this comment. And I've referred to this before, but not quoted directly from the source. He was allowed to enter one of the holies of holies, a temple where all of these statues were kept, wooden statues of their pharaohs and their chief priests. And he said, they led me into the inner sanctuary, which is a spacious chamber, and showed me a multitude of colossal statues in wood, which they counted up, and being for every high priest and rulers his lifetime to set up his statue in the temple. As they showed me the figures and reckoned them up, they assured me that each one was the son of one of the previous ones. And then he goes on and on to show that they were listing their great priest and their rulers, all of them. This is a wooden carving of Asar. And you'll see in some of the actual renderings of carvings of Asar that are more formal, some actually try and copy this. But this is the real person because it's the likeness of a specific human being, obviously an African, and obviously spiritual. Look at those eyes. But it's made out of wood the same way all of these pharaohs and chief priests were carved. That was for record keeping. And so this is a picture of Asar, and Asar is wearing the two crowns, the white crown and then the crown of the ram, which only Asar wore and probably other pharaohs following him, but dynastic Kemites did not, representing the fact that he ruled the entire country. All of it. Every last bit of it. Here you see a map of ancient Kemet. And these were some of the cities that the Anu ruled. And they included Aunt, Hermothesis, traditional birthplace. And this is blocking the other cities, but the Anu ruled all of Kemet, ancient Kemet at that time. And Dendera, where we saw the temple of Dendera, Heliopolis, that isn't noted. So this is the rulership going south and north. So Asar is the great ancestor, chief priest, and pharaoh of Kemet. Now, I will conclude this by trois stories, which I've mentioned before in previous shows. The trois say that They built a civilization called Kimi, Kimi. They say they built boats and sailed on the waters and built a great civilization. And then they tired of it and left it because exercising power did not make them happy. That may be why they left it. They may also have left it because the larger Africans whose netter for rule was Horus displaced them. And we know Menes was of that group. So Menes owed the civilization that he inherited to the Anu, the great ones, who decided to retreat from the civilization they had built and again enter a life of simplicity and happiness, where happiness, as they said, and I said in a previous show, involved bringing the antelope home and putting a smile on your wife's face and putting a smile on your children's face. So this is introduction to ancient Kemet. And so what does this have to do with us today? Well, as Garvey said, what you did great yesterday is an indication of what you can achieve today and tomorrow. In fact, whatever your ancestors achieved, you should be able to go even further. And contrary to popular opinion, you may not know it, but Blacks have built a civilization inside this country. We are a nation within a nation inside this country. In the midnight of slavery, we created not only a new African culture founded on the principles that these Twa and other Africans, Kemites and others gave us of humanism, of truth and justice, of balance, but we added new ones, and particularly the one of one Africa, Pan-Africanism, and the one of race consciousness, because color was what defined us. And in this place, we didn't have land, but we did have our peoplehood. And so you draw from your past to build your future. The further behind you can go back, the further ahead you can see. You hear me? And when you know what you could do, your people could do and did, you just know your potential, because you can even go higher. And so these Anu, these little people, gave us the world's greatest civilization, which is the Twa civilization that stretched across Mother Earth and was founded on the principle of male-female balance and a deep sense of spirit or spiritual purity or goodness. And from that, they experimented with the thing called Kemet and raised it to the heights that no people have ever seen before. So as a hip-hop artist say, we need to go black to the future. And by the way, Kemet meant black, black-skinned people. So this is this little study, 10,000-year ancient roots of dynastic Kemet, the civilization of the great ones, Hotep. Hope you got something out of that. Wolf Manlu. Did the Twa and the Anu have marriages and children together? So often these people are spoken of as separate people, so often and haven't been able to find any evidence of many mixed offspring. The Twa were hunter-gatherers at one point. They then innovate agriculture and give rise to agriculture. It's the women who do this. And so those Africans who move into the agrarian stage, some Twa did, larger Africans emerge after them. It is the women who are the agriculturalists in most cases, and with exceptions like the Yoruba, it's the men. The exception always proved the rule. So Twa When they move into the agrarian phase, some of them move into small societies, and set them up. Some of them, these are the foundation for larger societies. And some of them migrated into Kemet. Others migrate into Europe. Others migrate into the Americas. Others migrate into the South Pacific, into Asia, across the planet. So the Twa are the Anu in the agrarian phase. That's who they are. You saw that little guy there? That's a Twa in Anu form. That is agrarian. That's what a Twa is. Thank you, Rosmella Kumbo. I'm glad you got it. Thank you, Robin. Let's see if there's any. Wolf Manu. Evidence of flying vehicles. The temples of Abydos may be evidence of time travel as seen in the future. The Twa and Africans in general have high paranormal powers, as some people among all people do, but their civilization was endowed with that. In terms of flying vehicles, they didn't have any that were flying. I understand that there are some things that you might trace to that, but they were not into trying. Michael Guest, thank you. Where did the technology of highly advanced flying vehicles, electric lighting, come from? Blacks played a big role in the invention of the light in flying vehicles. Come out of the way in which scientists looked at how birds fly. That's a more modern invention. Did the Romans copy the Egyptian system for their government? By and large, I'd say no, because they had a warlike system. Their system was about war. And, they had rulers, they different types. Sometimes, in terms of military rule, they had dual rulers. One ruled one day, one ruled the other, and then they had emperors and stuff. No. Kurt Thomas, just goes to show how turned around we as a people have been. No, it doesn't. How could you draw from what I'm talking about here, how turned around we are? We've come under oppression, but at the same time, built up a civilization here. At the same time, we're under forces that are devastating. So if you're not involved in a fight, you're involved in a talk. You need to be involved in a walk. And the people who have been involved in a walk have advanced things for our people. We could lose, I've made this comment before, we could lose 90% of our humanity and have more than any people other than Native Americans, and other Africans on the planet. Steve McKenzie, can astrology be tied in with Egyptian numerology, or are the readings different? They're different, but similar in that numbers in African systems and spiritual systems are viewed both as entities and quantities, meaning numbers, everything has power. If you look at yourself, you'll probably see a number, a specific number has an influence on you, because at a certain time of the month, which is a special number of yours, or time of the year or whatever, you'll see certain things happening. That's indicating that numbers are more than quantities. Lao Tzu. Question: in early Kemet, was writing more prevalent than we were led to believe also, was this the medium to transmit knowledge from one generation to the next? You can see from the illustration that I have here that this is Meta Nature writing. And they're not sure of the exact time of this, but 5000 BC, we're not sure. But writing was developed in a very ancient period of time. Yes. Exactly when, we don't know. But they developed that. That was a medium, transmitting knowledge through writing. But it was also through the spoken word, because writing imitated speech. And in Kemet, it was a walking, talking, doing language. And speech had the greater power because it conveyed vital force or the energy or the truth. Writing also has its power to the extent that it's truthful. Lao Tzu. Did Africans move into Lower Africa, the area that would become Egypt, because the climate and geography allowed them to conduct research? I think it was more than that. But I think one of the things about Kemet is the climate is good, but it's easy to earn a living, meaning agricultural work requires hardly no effort because you have the flooding of the Nile. So when the Nile recedes, then you have this black alluvial soil that you just have to stick a seed in. You didn't have to do the hard work on the land that you did in most other parts of Africa. So it was conducive to agrarian civilization. And of course, it was conducive to observing the stars because of the clear sky overhead. And then, of course, it's the people who were conducive to this because they had this kind of approach to civilization. Dr. Obutashaka, question. Chancellor Williams calls Egypt the daughter of Ethiopia. Good question. Wayne Chandler, who is an outstanding historian, makes the mistake of equating the Anu with the Ethiopians. And this is going off of classical references coming from the Romans and the Greeks, where they say that Asar was an Ethiopian sent into Egypt by the Ethiopians. Asar was not an Ethiopian, Asar was an Anu. And so people hadn't studied this area. Chancellor Williams hadn't studied this area. So he's going on classical sources. And Ethiopia does not have a 10,000 year history either. It has an ancient history. And these two groups interact a lot. And it's the Ethiopians who are moving into Kemet and saving it at certain periods or coming in and conquering it when Kemet's weak. This is during the dynastic period. And I should also point out, Nubia was a part of the Anu civilization. It was one of the areas that had the 3 vertical registers. So, but they're kin in the sense that they both have just systems. And in fact, I would say, compared to the dynastic Kemites, the Ethiopians were more consistent in their practice of justice, and particularly with women. Kentuckys were queen mothers and could rule in their own right. In dynastic Kemet, women ruled only exceptionally. Pharaohs ruled through the power of their sisters who carried the right to rule. How should we research some of our astrological chart? You need to get somebody that knows astrology, can train you in it. I said go to my sister, Sandrea Bradley, or people may have someone else that's good at that they would recommend. Okay. I'm not talking about the war with Scorpion because that'll come in the second show. That's Wolf Manlu. That'll come in the second show, and that will be the week after next, because next week we're going to have a brother on who's from Haiti, who's going to give us up-to-date information on Haiti and what we can do to be supportive of the Haitian people. And then we'll have another show that will deal with that, you know. Oh, we have a brother, Yegba Abduli. He makes this important, informative statement. He's he's watching from Nigeria. This is interesting. Pharaoh Nema, Nema, father of King Teta, father of King Ata, father of King Ata Dejet, the progenitor of the Igala people, and watching you from the palace of Ata Igala, the king of Igala Kingdom of Nigeria, Africa. Well done. Thank you. And the Yoruba and other Africans in Nigeria and other parts of Africa have strong kingly systems, royal systems. My name, Oba, I take it not because I'm a king. I'm not going to be installed as any king, but because I like the idea of how that rulership worked. That when the king, the Oba, was picked, often by an eldest male and female, sometimes, he had to follow the will of the council. And if he failed to on 3 occasions, he received a ball with the parrot feather in it, which meant kill yourself. I like that idea that you didn't have kings that just had unchecked power. And again, it's coming from a noble constitution. So appreciate you, brother Ajegba, and encourage more people from Nigeria to watch. And my Babalawo is Araba Ifayemi from Ishogbo. If you know him, let him know you watch the show. Yes, Asar was Twa. You better believe it. He's Anu. Anu or Twa. Okay, Wolf, Manlu. Now these Western scientists are admitting that Heru Sphinx is anywhere from 18,000 to 36,000 years old. We don't know, but it's very likely that it's in the cycle of Leo, processional cycle of Leo. M. Jewell, Baba Jeffries fought for our history as well on the collegiate level as well. Many students should be grateful for you and others who stood up. Yeah, Leonard did good work, and with the help of James Smalls, and he and his wife are lovers of Africa and African people. Rosalind Jeffries, great lady, great scholar in her own right. Okay, The Art of Egyptian Metaphysics, saying he was born in Cape Verde Island, the country of Amilcar Cabral. Yeah, great man. Great man. Okay, this is a good point. M. Jewel, you may not know, hitting the like button saves the video in your YT account. Okay, your YouTube account. Okay, I didn't know that. Thanks. Alexandria White. Baba Tashaka, I had you as a professor over 20 years ago, San Francisco State. Thank you for your continued dedication to elucidating and uplifting the sacred and powerful origins of our people. You are a gift and treasure to our people. I still remember your lectures on the Dogon and other things you taught us. Well, Alexandra, thank you. I learned a lot from y'all, whole lot. My book, The Integration Track, as I pointed out before, the one that's up there on the screen now, came from me not being able to answer a question coming from one of my students. Not something, an experience that I look forward to, but it actually was rewarding. It gave me answers, you know. Wolf Manlu, did the Chua Anu say where they came from before the foothills and the mountains of the moon? I heard it said that they said originally from the Orion system. Oh, stellar wise, I don't know. But clearly the Chua from the Congo region, they came from the mountain to the moon area and migrated into Kemet. That way, the others, who are the San people, the Kung people, they come from the desert regions of the Kalahari Desert, migrate into Europe, migrate probably into Kemet as well. Wolf Manlu, the Chua Anu got everything they knew from observing nature from what I've learned. No, they didn't. They got a lot from observing nature. They piped into God. They got it from God. They got it from all different places. You know what I mean? So a lot of their healing was spirit healing, not just herbs, for example. You'd learn what the property of herbs could do, but then there are other spiritual ways that people were also cured. He's asking what in nature would lead to a pyramid being built. A termite hill. A termite hill looks like a pyramid. But I'm not saying that's where it came from. People could come up with that on their own. And in fact, we know where the pyramid structure came from. It came from Imhotep taking a mastaba, which is one slab, and then adding a smaller size one on top of each one until you got to the top, which is called the step pyramid. Alexis Terry, what a nice compliment. I'm definitely a king. But tell my wife that. I know what the answer she'll have to that is. She's the queen, and she definitely is. Wolf Manu, every lunar phase is special as every constellational alignment. These celestial figures all give off energies. True. Ibun Ife, hello to you too. Christopher Washington, thank you. This has been very enlightening. I'm interested in the Chua and Anu, and you have helped me in my research for knowledge about their story. Good. I don't know what this is about. What is that Chua relationship to Akkadian and to the Shawshank Dynasty? I don't know anything about the Shawshank Dynasty. When is my book Seba coming out? If I wasn't doing this show, it would have been out. But I'm not excusing the show for it not being out. It'll be out this year, and hopefully the earlier part of the year. Right now, I've just been polishing up some chapters, and I'm getting into looking at Amilcar Cabral's mature period, which is improvisation, or Boloso period, which is where you bring things together, come up with your own voice. And then I have to do my own. And then I will take 5 masters and go through their innovative phase. Obinga, Ella Baker, Amilcar Cabral, John Coltrane, myself. And so when that's done, then right now 658 pages are finished. That part will be finished. Then it's application of these teaching methods, because one is classroom and community teaching. And so that's one. It changes it from the deposit, drop information into people's system of the West. It's a replacement system for teaching on all levels. And that can be the mother teaching the child, which is the model to start with. The teacher teaching in a classroom. It can be the liberation movement and the way in which you learn. It can be the learning method in prison and in spirit-based institutions. So it's whole. And then there's the one on mastery, which a heavy part of this book is dedicated to, which is how an average musician like Coltrane became a master, or how an extraordinary person took their skills to a higher level. And so I'm crossing different domains to look at that, to encourage the continuation of our own apprenticeship, not mentoring system. The term mentor comes from Greece, and it was the people who babysat for warriors when they went to war. And we never, when I was growing up, we never called the people who we learned from mentors. They were masters, you know. Okay, that's it. Hotep. This took some work. I know you can appreciate it. And use it and share it. Hotep, until next week.